In 1986, Jim Carrey decided to play slightly against type with a more dark and twisted role in The Cable Guy. It's time to take a look back at one of Jim's more controversial roles and also discuss why I believe it to be one of his most underrated. First-time screenwriter Lou Holtz Jr. had the idea for The Cable Guy while working in Los Angeles, declaring that he once saw a cable company employee in the hallway of his mother's apartment building at night, and it made him uncomfortable that he was there so late. Maybe he lived there. Maybe he was banging your mum. Originally the role of the Cable Guy was written for Chris Farley, but he turned it down due to scheduling difficulties. Jim Carrey then came on board, receiving a then record $20 million to star.
Hello, mama.
Following Carrey's signing, Columbia hired Judd Apatow to produce. The studio rebuffed Apatow's interest in directing, but accepted his suggestion to invite none other than young Ben Stiller to direct, who Apatow had worked with on the Ben Stiller Show airing on MTV. Stiller would in a few years go on to become a huge comedy movie star himself, but first off he would direct the biggest comedy star on the planet. The original screenplay by Lou Holtz Jr. was a lighter comedy described by Apatow as a what about Bob kind of annoying friend movie, where the Cable Guy was a likeable loser who intrudes upon the cable subscriber's life but never in a physically threatening way. Carrey, Apatow and Stiller liked the setup of someone who is really smart with technology invading somebody's life, and opted to add slapstick and darker tones, changing it into a satire of thrillers such as Cape Fear. Holtz wrote 4 additional drafts, each one darker than the previous, before leaving the project and giving Apatow the opportunity to take over writing. The final script ended up having elements so disturbing that Columbia had many complaints regarding certain scenes, and were constantly calling back and forth with Apatow and co to object.
So, I'm the tardy one?
The film was wrongly perceived as a box office failure after its June 14, 1996 release. While the movie's final gross of just over $60 million domestically and $102 million worldwide was much less than the string of massive Jim Carrey movies from 94 and 95, the film only cost $47 million to make and didn't use a major marketing campaign from Columbia Pictures. The idea that the movie was a disaster was widely circulated by rival studios and production companies because they were angry and frustrated that Columbia set a high market for star salaries by giving Carrey an unprecedented $20 million paycheck.
Well, maybe I shouldn't have come at all. Jerk off!
Cable Guy tells the story of regular guy Stephen Kovacs, played by Matthew Broderick, who has his cable installed by a bizarre cable guy known as Chip Douglas, played by Jim Carrey. Stephen then finds from that day on the Cable Guy wants more than a customer. He wants a best friend and will stop at nothing to achieve it, starting off as a mildly eccentric acquaintance and eventually becoming a full-fledged psycho stalker. I'm not kidding here, I really think this is one of Jim Carrey's greatest performances. I'm serious, this dark and twisted turn showed another side to Carrey. Sure, on the surface he's still doing the typical Jim Carrey mannerisms, but he brings a new dimension to it in The Cable Guy, adding this underlying sinister edge to his character. Carrey gives us brief glimpses of the character's inner turmoil, even in the comedic moments. It's a very physical performance and there's always something new you notice whenever you watch him in action. Several scenes are even quite uncomfortable, and you feel a mixture of sympathy and disdain for the Cable Guy, and Carrey does well to make sure he is never completely unlikable and that we see his damaged soul. The lisp is a big part of the character, and Carrey delivers it so well, making it awkward and creepy but also very hilarious when it needs to be. On paper it sounds like it wouldn't be funny and more of a comedic crutch, but when you see it delivered it really works and goes along with the strange oddball feeling the movie is trying to create.
I'm kind of a perfectionist.
We never find out the Cable Guy's name, and we learn he has used many aliases, with the one he goes by for the majority of this film being Chip Douglas.
It's Ernie Douglas. But my friends call me Chip.
That smile never works out. Just ask my exes. Matthew Broderick is probably the weak link in the movie. He's not terrible, but he's not great either. He's good in some of the scenes, but in a lot of the film he's just bland. I understand what they were going for, just a normal guy who meets this abnormal person, but even in the moments of real danger and conflict, he doesn't put in much emotion. He's not even bad, he's just there. I just struggle to sympathise with him because he's so boring.
He's a good man.
What, even in Inspector Gadget?
I don't know what all the fuss was about! I saw that movie 6 times! It ruled!
How dare you? There is a real love for pop culture celebrated in The Cable Guy, but at the same time the dark side of entertainment is explored, as we see what can happen if your love for pop culture leaves you isolated from the world. This theme brings home for me. I absolutely adore movies, music and TV, but I find that if I cut myself off for too long and only experience them alone with no human contact for days, I am prone to depression and anxiety. Movies are my favourite thing, but interaction with others is vital, and sadly The Cable Guy never had that. He just had the TV screen and nothing else. And this has left him desperate for friendship as he struggles to relate to others in a regular way. Ingeniously, in the flashback of The Cable Guy as a child, where he is left alone by his mother, the movie he is watching is Play Misty for Me, starring Clint Eastwood, which was also about an obsessively jealous stalker. The film makes you think a lot about our consumption of entertainment, and this was in the 90s, so of course now we are even more prone to being cut off from reality than ever, in a world where children are brought up looking at phones and screens far more than their parents' faces in a lot of cases. The Cable Guy offers several bonkers scenes that allow Jim Carrey to shine in all his over-the-top glory. The scene everyone remembers in this is when the Cable Guy takes Stephen to his favourite restaurant, Medieval Times. This scene has become ingrained into pop culture and is a true riot to watch. Once again, the movie walks the line between comedy and horror as the Cable Guy turns maniac on Stephen, wishing to fight him to the death in a homage to Kirk and Spock from the Star Trek episode Amok Time. This scene is absolutely bonkers, but admittedly hilarious.
Goodbye, Jim.
I guess Medieval Times just allows people to try and kill each other after their meal. What if someone actually gets hurt? Fuck it, it's their own fault. The sequence at Medieval Times also contains one of my most favourite Jim Carrey moments ever, and it might be because I'm an immature idiot, but it absolutely personifies the ridiculous humour we all identify Carrey with at this time.
Check this out.
Silence of the land. Hello, Clarice. It's good to see you again.
That moment was also entirely improvised, with director Ben Stiller loving it so much he kept it in. If you look at Matthew Broderick's face during the scene, you can tell he is cracking up. His reaction was actually genuine. The Cable Guy playing basketball is also a very odd and darkly funny scene. Director Ben Stiller uses slow motion to create this surreal feeling, almost taking us into the Cable Guy's mind, as if what we're seeing is his demented interpretation of the situation, that him acting like this is somehow impressive. There are many other scenes like this too, where Stiller gives the film a real vivid and trippy feel to it, like when Stephen has a nightmare about the Cable Guy. He also beats the hell out of a young Owen Wilson in a restroom in a real dose of twisted humour that I loved watching growing up, but it also creeped me out. Such an odd but hilarious scene.
Ooh, right into the buckle. That's gotta hurt, Gene.
Only Jim Carrey could make beating the living crap out of a defenceless person funny. This movie is all about realising these sorts of people can in fact exist, and we should sympathise and try and help them, while at the same time being cautious and careful. Despite him being just as zany as ever, the Cable Guy was certainly Carrey's most grounded character he had ever played at this point, and it was a masterstroke that we got to see him tackle a more interesting and real character, while at the same time not having to sacrifice his comedic appeal. The Cable Guy also made some very accurate predictions about the future that came true. Don't believe me? Just listen.
Soon every American home will integrate their television, phone, and computer. You'll be able to visit the Louvre on one channel, or watch female mud wrestling on another. You can do your shopping at home, or play Mortal Kombat with a friend in Vietnam.
Ever since I heard that, I've always wanted to play Mortal Kombat with someone from Vietnam. Just to say I've done it, just to quote this movie. So, any Vietnamese out there, bring it on. I'll kick your ass with Liu Kang.
You stupid son of a bitch.
The Cable Guy for me is one of Carrey's most underrated roles, and underrated movies full stop. The ambition here was very admirable for the time, and there's a real fearless vibe running throughout the movie. It was a very brave move for Carrey Apatow and Stiller to go this route, after Carrey had established himself one way to go left field. While the Cable Guy divided opinions, some critics did indeed enjoy the movie, with famous critic Gene Siskel calling it Carrey's best since The Mask. His At the Movies partner Roger Ebert placed it in his worst of '96 and called it way too creepy. I do feel The Cable Guy is one of those films that people are going back to and re-evaluating. For me, I've always loved it. I find it unique and bold, and it still contains some of the funniest Carrey humour too, and there are several scenes in this film that are strongly ingrained in my mind, and the movie is unforgettable. Matthew Broderick wasn't great, but once again this movie was riding the incredible wave that was Jim Carrey's career. Even in a film that broke away from his usual shtick, he was still able to carry it on his shoulders and make it a must-see 90s classic. So my original review for Ace Ventura was blocked for copyright, ironically for a clip of Ace talking out of his arse. Imagine that. So I'm actually going to redo that review, and I'm also going to get to 1997's Liar Liar in my Jim Carrey reviews. But before Christmas, or just around after Christmas, I do want to review a Christmas movie, and it's going to be the dark Christmas classic Gremlins. So that's coming up also. Thanks for watching, and what do you think of The Cable Guy? Do you think it's an underrated Jim Carrey movie, or do you think it deserves the mixed reception that it gets? Let's talk about it in the comments down below. Thanks for watching everyone, please subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys next time.
Yes, Steven!